I figured I would provide a bit of backstory into the short story you are about to hear, as I always do, because I really like doing these. So, Ivory Trees is a short story I wrote way back in November of 2018. I was trying to look back through the dates, and apparently I had written it November 17th of 2018. For some strange reason, I thought I'd written this short story in early 2019, but I remember, oh wait, I had written this story, I think, in my old house that I used to live in, but that's a different story for another day. But yeah, so I'm gonna be honest, I still don't really fully know why I decided to name the characters in this story Aylin and Tanner. Those are such weird names. Then again, I could have sworn, isn't Aylin one of the names of, a Sarah J. Maas character in, her Throne of Glass series? I don't know. I think that's where I got the name from, so, or the name Aylin from, so it's not super unique. But yeah, I don't know, so, the basic concept of this story is, I mean, okay, yes, it's a story about, friendship and stuff, but I remember I think I either Googled images of, ivory trees or, a forest or something, and then so basically, the image of this forest, I guess, appeared in my head, and then I started writing not too long after that. I also think it's really interesting, the style choices I wrote for this story, and the fact that I wrote it in third person, which I pretty much never do. As a writer, I've always written my stories in either first person past tense or first person present tense, but I digress. Regardless, though, even though I'm not a professional voice actress by any means, I really hope you enjoy this story nonetheless. Oh, and I guess a little bit of a fun side note is, so the way I typically record these stories is I will basically do, not a batch recording, but basically I will record it all in one take, and then I will edit the recording to where it doesn't sound so clunky and awkward. After my long pauses, I will edit those out, and then my weird throat sounds, I don't know, I will also edit those out. I don't know, because I'm trying to get better at these recordings. Then again, I am not a professional. I am just an amateur, a girl with her iPhone using the voice memo app. That is literally how I record my voiceovers. I don't have any fancy equipment, but okay. This author's note is getting way too long, but I just wanted to pop in here and give a little anecdote about this story. And one last thing I'll say, I think it's really interesting that I wrote about divorce a little bit in this story. So the timeline lines up to how I wrote this story a year after my own parents had divorced. So I don't know. I just think that's interesting that I included that little anecdote in the story. But okay, I'm not gonna say too much because I don't want to spoil it, but I hope you enjoy. The forest of ivory trees glistened in the sunlight and were enough to draw anyone in their beauty. After all, it was quite an enchanting environment to be in, and was one of the most beautiful sights Aylin had seen in a while upon first arriving here. They reminded her of icicles sparkling on sunlight after a snowfall, or by being surrounded by pretty fairy lights. She really hadn't seen anything this unique before, and to her, the sight of this forest was a spectacular one. Not only that, But as Aylin soon discovered, an environment like this was a good place for one to clear their mind and to be alone with their thoughts. That was one feature of the forest that stood out to her throughout all the weeks she'd been coming here, and to her, the forest definitely lived up to that expectation. This was a place where she found solace and peace within herself, and was her way of escaping the chaos that was currently a part of her life. The forest was her getaway, her escape from reality, her safe place. The past 3 months, unfortunately, hadn't been very kind to Aylin, seeing as her parents were experiencing a bitter divorce and were still in the thick of it. It seemed as though all she was around nowadays was constant fighting, bickering, and disputes, which wasn't pleasant. Aylin had managed to deal with it throughout most of her life, but one day a few weeks ago, she reached her breaking point and decided that enough was enough. So, on that day, she left the house and went for a walk to finally allow herself to be alone with her thoughts for the first time in many years. In return, this is instantly what led her to stumble across the Ivory tree forest, and from that day forward, she found herself standing within it whenever she could, during the moments when she needed to escape the chaos of her life. As a concept, ivory trees continued to remain something of a mystery to Aylin, given the fact that she never saw much of them, but nonetheless, she eventually found the beauty within them, along with a newfound appreciation of what this place meant to her. It seemed as though this forest could never do her wrong, and that she would continue to remain the only person within it, alone with her thoughts, as she always was. One day, though, however, that all changed. As she was out in the forest again, her sense of aloneness shifted when she was pulled away from her thoughts by the sudden snap of a branch. Her heart raced rapidly in her chest at the sound, and fear began to rise up within her. What was that? She wondered, as she looked around, trying to piece together who or what broke the branch she heard snap. Who could it be? Then she saw him, a boy, who looked to be about her age or older, stood in the forest wearing a thin black sweater, blue jeans, and boots. The boy had a scrawny build, with a pale complexion, round face, icy blonde hair, and bright gray eyes. At first, Aylin thought he didn't see her, but then he finally caught sight of her. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other with dumbfounded expressions on their faces. The silence between them, though, didn't last long, and broke when the boy snapped out of his daze and awkwardly spoke. Who are you? Have we ever met before? Aylin shook her head. She had never seen him in her life. I don't believe we have, she replied calmly. Although I am curious as to why you're out here in this forest, if you don't mind me asking. The boy wasn't quick to respond and took a few moments to think of something to say, and he did once he had his response. Why would you like to know? He replied harshly, crossing his arms over his chest and glaring back at her with an annoyed expression. It's none of your business anyway. Can't I just keep some things to myself for once and not have nosy people like you constantly up in my space? Taken aback, Aylin froze, clearly not expecting something like this to come from a boy she only just crossed paths with, but then again, not all people were the nicest. How rude, she thought. At least the boy could have politely said he didn't feel like talking about it. However, much to her surprise, the boy had a change of heart and snapped out of whatever mood he was in. He now looked at her with an apologetic expression on his face, with wide eyes. Oh, I'm so sorry. I really didn't mean. It's okay. Strangely, this kind of thing doesn't bother me because I'm used to it, she interjected. Despite his mannerisms earlier, although they didn't last long, Aylin was willing to give him a second chance for him to redeem himself. I'm so sorry, he said again. I usually don't do this, but sometimes when I'm having an off day, I just snap. God, I sound like such an idiot right now. My point is, I really didn't mean to come off as rude. Something just came over me, and I'm not excusing it, but He paused, seeming to have trouble forming the right words to say to her. In turn, he was just as shocked as she was, but nonetheless, despite their earlier exchange, was willing to make it better. You know what? Let's start over. My apologies. Aylin nodded. If that's what the boy was willing to do, she was willing to comply. If you want to know why I'm in the forest, the answer is simple, he replied. I came here because I really need a space to clear my head. I usually don't tell people this, but my grandfather died not too long ago, you see, and since then, things with my family have been chaotic, and I just need to get away from all of that. Do you see what I mean? Aylin nodded. She knew exactly what he meant, and suddenly, upon hearing that, something in her brain just clicked, and despite only knowing this boy for a short while in that moment, she felt as though she found someone she could relate to. She felt as though she was no longer alone. She knew very well what it meant to find a clear headspace in the midst of chaos, and she was overjoyed that someone else shared that thought alongside her, even though his circumstances were different than hers. Without thinking, Aylin shouted excitedly, Yes, I know exactly what you mean. I know how it feels. The boy continued to look at her with wide eyes. You do? Yes. And I'm glad to see that I no longer feel alone in this. I'm glad to know that someone else understands. For a long moment, things were silent between them, but then Aylin broke the silence by saying, with a smile, I believe I haven't properly introduced myself. I'm Aylin, by the way. She extended her hand out to him. The boy smiled in return. Tanner, he replied, extending his hand out to her as well. Both Tanner and Aylin shook hands. I hope my rude introduction earlier didn't turn you away. I really am sorry, Tanner said. I forgive you, Aylin replied. Besides, I'm already over it. I get over things fast. Oh, they both laughed and silenced themselves. So, now it's my turn to ask you, what brings you to the forest, Aylin? She smiled, and without hesitation, she told him her entire story, all the emotions and thoughts she'd been having through her parents' divorce, and how she too found the forest of ivory trees to be a safe place for her to clear her head, just like he did. At that point, Aylin wasn't even thinking about what she was saying and just began pouring her heart out to him as though it were nothing. It was as if he were someone she knew for years rather than having just met him. After their earlier exchange, along with his apology, she found that Tanner was easy to talk to. She'd needed to vent, and she was glad that Tanner was willing to listen to her do so. He didn't interrupt once, and instead stood there and listened, giving his sympathy when appropriate. Once she was finished, he looked at her and said, While I do feel bad for the situation this puts you in, strangely enough, I'm glad I'm the person you told this to. She smiled. Thanks for listening. It's my pleasure. After spending what felt like hours in the ivory forest together, Aylin and Tanner decided to bid each other goodbye and go their separate ways. But before each of them walked away from one another, Tanner stopped her and said, Well, I had such a nice time meeting and chatting with you, Aylin. Will I ever see you again? Maybe, she replied. I mean, I sure hope so, but even then, I'm not trying to get my hopes up. While I had a nice time with you too, I don't know how likely we'd be to see each other again. It depends when we're both in the forest next, or elsewhere. I see, Tanner said. Well, wherever it'll be, I do hope to see you again sometime. I do too, Aylin replied. And with that, Tanner and Aylin reluctantly went their separate ways. Little did she know, though, that she and Tanner would become inseparable friends down the line, and from this day forward, they continued to see each other in the forest whenever they needed to clear their heads, but alongside that, they talked to each other as well. The friendship she had with Tanner soon became special to Aylin in ways she couldn't articulate or describe. He just meant something to her, understood her in ways she thought no one else could. That ended up being all she needed, and through the time they spent together, Aylin learned something very meaningful. She learned just how special, powerful a friendship could be, even if it was the most unlikely of friendships. Aylin held it close to her heart nonetheless. Through her time in the ivory tree forest, she never knew what something could become until she experienced it for herself, and for that she was forever grateful.